Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 815. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about dramatic monasteries, jagged cliffs, whitewashed towns, windmills, and goats as we go to the Greek Isles of Astypalaia and Amorgos. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about Astypalaia and Amorgos. I'd like to welcome to the show Michael and Cassandra from Journey of MC on Instagram, who've come to talk to us about two of the Greek Isles. Michael and Cassandra, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having us. We're big fans of the podcast, and it's an honor to be here.
Thanks, Chris.
It just doesn't seem like an honor to me. I'm here every week. I said the Greek Isles, and obviously we're going to talk about two specific islands. I wimped out because I had not heard of these islands. So where are we talking about today?
We're starting off in Astypalaia and Amorgos, which are two islands in the Aegean Sea. Now, most people are familiar with the Aegean Sea with Santorini and Mykonos, but these are more remote islands. One is actually in the Cyclades, which is Amorgos, and Astypalaia is in the Deccanese island chain. And both of these are to the east of Mykonos and Santorini.
Okay. And what is your connection with these two islands?
Sure. So our connection with Astypalaia and Amorgos, or actually the Greek Cyclades Islands, is that we traveled once about 7 years ago, and then we just returned again a couple weeks ago. So we've been to 5 islands in the Cycladic area. And if you want a little bit more credibility to that, my name Cassandra is actually famous in Greek mythology, so I'm technically a Trojan priestess.
I did not know that. I feel like I blew the introduction then.
It felt like an extra honor to be there when I was there talking about my name, to be honest. The Greek people definitely perked up and said, "Oh, Cassandra, that's Greek." And I said, "Yes, but I'm actually not Greek."
And why should someone go to, and I'm going to get you to get me to say, if nothing else we get out of this episode, I'm going to say Amorgos and Astypalaia.
That was perfect, Chris.
Okay.
That was absolutely
Why
perfect.
should someone go to Astypalaia and Amorgos?
Sure. So Astypalaia is known to have the most scenic hora in all of Greece. And when I say hora, that means these little iconic historic towns with those sugar cube houses perched up on a hill. It also has these smaller idyllic islets that you can visit by boat. It has a strong energetic presence that we were drawn to, a magnetic kind of positive energy. And then Amorgos, on the other hand, it's wild with soaring mountains. It has remote beach hikes. It has an 11th century monastery that is built in the side of a cliff. It's a sheer kind of architectural wonder and a reason to visit Amorgos alone.
And Chris, we were really looking to avoid the crowds. European travel has really exploded this year. And so one of the things we wanted was to find some islands in Greece that would offer us a respite from that, a relaxed and uncrowded experience.
Yeah, a lot of us have been looking for less crowds over the last couple of years, so I understand why one might be doing that. Excellent. What kind of itinerary are you going to recommend for us?
Sure. So we're going to recommend an itinerary. We had about 8 days. So we did 3 days in Astypalaia, 4 days in Amorgos, and 1 in Santorini. But I would say if we were to go back and do it again, we would like to spend a little bit more time. We felt a bit rushed. So we would recommend probably a 10 to 14 day itinerary. As far as what style of itinerary we're offering, we really like to do a treasure hunt and look for beautiful vistas. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be wandering through villages. We're going to be hiking to remote beaches. We'll be looking for the most epic sunset spots in an island. And then we're going to be enjoying all the authentic food in as most gorgeous restaurants we can find.
Excellent.
Yeah, we're starting in Astypalaia. Now,
Okay.
Astypalaia, we recommend to start with is that you end up flying into Athens from the U.S. if you're traveling from the U.S. And Astypalaia is only about an hour flight away from Athens. So the good news there is if you fly into Athens, you can immediately or just within the same day get on a plane and get over to Astypalaia. Or you could stay in Athens if you'd like.
Okay.
But we wanted to maximize our time on the island, so we went to Athens and straight to Astypalaia. And you can also ferry to Astypalaia, but it's about a 10-hour ferry ride that stops at different islands, so we definitely recommend flying.
And that's the fast ferry is still 10 hours?
Yes, fastest ferry you can take is 10 hours.
Because there
So-
are two sets of ferries is the reason I asked the question, just so
Yeah,
people know
yeah.
there's the slow ferry and then there's the ones with the double hull fast ferries, but there's still some distance to cover. Okay.
Absolutely. We definitely recommend renting a car because you're going to want to explore the island as we did. And it's so easy on Astypalaia because it's a small island, right? It's only about 11 miles long, 1,400 residents. So the rental car company owner meets you at the airport with the car and just hands it off to you. So it's very convenient. We drove into our hotel, which is really a small, beautiful 4-villa hotel. And the thing on Astypalaia is there's no chain hotels. They're all either apartment rentals or small boutique hotels that you can find. And if you can find one close to the Hora, which is the main village of Astypalaia, where all the action is, we'd highly recommend that because that is the ultimate viewpoint for Astypalaia, is the wonderful whitewashed buildings that you see from your residence while staying there. So the first day is...
And a question for you. So the shape of this island is, to me, looks like an inverted butterfly. So you've got an airport in the middle. Where is the place that you want us to stay in terms of the Hora?
Oh, absolutely. And that's funny you mentioned the butterfly, Chris, because the island is actually known as the butterfly of the Aegean because of its shape, not because of butterflies on the island. And Astypalaia is actually named Astypalaia because there's a story around a way that Poseidon fell in love with a nymph, a gorgeous nymph, and she wasn't really interested in him, so she turned herself into a fish-tailed leopard and to avoid him. But apparently Poseidon found her and turned her into a butterfly. And that's apparently the story of how Astypalaia got its name. But where exactly we're on Astypalaia?
So if you're thinking about looking at the butterfly, you're going to want to be looking at the left wing of the butterfly or say the west wing of the butterfly. And it's just going to be just past underneath the middle of where the butterfly would be is where the Hora is. And you're just staying right outside. It's not a far distance. It's just right so that you can walk into the Hora in about 5 to 7 minutes.
Got it. Okay.
So we would recommend, and what we did was we got there late morning and we wanted to rest and kind of get over the jet lag for an hour or two. And by the time we got out and started exploring, it was a little bit late afternoon. We wandered into the Hora and it was the perfect time to do it because we didn't realize it, but all the shops close around 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock. So while most people might have been disappointed, we liked wandering in the peacefulness of that kind of afternoon light where it wasn't directly overhead, it wasn't too hot, it was bouncing off the little sugar cube houses and the little blue church tops and the magenta bougainvillea that was pouring down into little alleyways, and we just got lost, and even the cats were napping. We just lost, and we just wandered until we hit the castle. And there's probably a direct path to the castle, but we found that every road we walked to, we would end up at the castle anyway, so wasn't hard to find. The castle's perched on the top of the hill. It was built in the 13th century. You walk up these steps and through these huge wooden doors, and you're out into the castle ruins where you can just wander and immerse yourself into that historic ruins. And you can explore a little bit. You can walk the grounds. There's no ropes to say that you can't walk on this because it's protected or that. And that's something unique, I think, about Greece, is that probably for the long-term preservation of all this, it's not great, but you really can just immerse yourself into the ruins, which is very unique. So
it's not stanchioned off. You can roam freely, and it wasn't crowded at all, which was really nice. And you can walk up to some of the guard towers and just look over the edge. It could be a little bit gnarly because you could feel like you could fall off, but the views from there were spectacular.
Yeah.
I'm reading that it's an old Venetian castle, although I don't know that I would have recognized it as such from the design.
Yeah, there's a history of Venetians, Byzantians. That castle itself, I believe, housed about 1,000 people at one time, or just over 1,000. You'd be amazed at how small it is and how many people could fit in there. And I guess it survived many barrages of military bombardment over the years. And then the Hora was built around it. So it's really just standing there as a landmark. But it's lit up at night. You can see it from a distance as a gray castle on top of a mound of white Cycladic architecture. And that was the unique thing about Astypalaia, is that even though it's a Dodecanese island, it looks like a Cycladic island with those classic whitewashed buildings.
Okay. I don't know that I would have known the difference between the two, I will admit, but I don't think I've been to the Dodecanese yet.
Yeah, we were looking up what the true differences were, and it was hard. There's a lot of similarities. I think the Dodecanese tend to have a little more colorful buildings, but it's also further away from Greece, so the Dodecanese tend to be a little bit more remote. But Astypalaia being the closest to the Cyclades, again, easier to get there, so that's why we chose it. But yeah, that first night was epic in terms of just seeing that Hora in its splendor. That was really magical.
Okay.
Yeah, after you could visit the castle in the daytime, we would recommend you wander back into the Hora. The shops will be opening. You can stop in and get local honey or any of the local Greek pastries or any of the local jams. You can do that, and then you can wander to dinner. One of the places that we didn't get to eat at, but we've heard was really great from some of the other guests, was Barbosa, if you want a recommendation for that. But then we would say after dinner, if you're feeling full and you still have some energy, to walk back up to the castle, because at night when the stars are above, you have a blanket of stars above and you have the village just gleaming below you. It's even more magical and mysterious than the daytime castle.
Yeah, and these Horas, the one thing we found is that Greeks eat pretty late. And so the Hora really comes to life at around 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. So the restaurants that are within the main drag, let's just say, through the Hora, they just come to life, and there's an energy there of local as well as tourists.
Okay.
So I guess after day one, day two involved a boat ride, which is really a yacht. This is one of the popular things to do in Astypalaia. There's a few companies that operate these tours on Astypalaia where they take you out to about 3 different islands that are just off of Astypalaia. They're remote islands. No one lives on them, but they're very scenic. And we got lucky in our hotel, actually. The owner of the hotel owned a boat that he operated, a tour company, and it was on the smaller side, so it fit only about 10 people, 10 guests. So it was a really nice experience to be with guests from all around, really, the country.
Yeah, Greece and France and Switzerland and Australia, all over the world.
And they take you out, and you stop at, the first stop is an island in which you just take a nice dip in the blue sea. You can snorkel. Now, I will say that the snorkeling in this area of Greece isn't amazing in terms of the fish, because you've got volcanic rock underneath, so not a lot of live coral, but still, nevertheless, it's great to see because the blue waters are crystal clear, and you're just enjoying the refreshing dip, because it was warm around this time of year. I'd say 80 degrees or so, but just a great dip first. And then
and you say this time of year, let's put it on the calendar. When were you there?
July.
Yeah, we were there
The
in
beginning
July.
of July. The water was
Okay.
pretty cold, I will say. Very refreshing.
Yeah, very refreshing but cold. July is actually their high season, and I'll tell you again, we were looking to avoid the crowds. It was not crowded at all. So I think we achieved that for July being a high part of the season. So yeah, so the waters were cold. It was wonderful to swim in them, but the real highlight of the yacht tour was the next stop at Red Rock, which were a series of caves that you can swim under and into. And I guess around World War II, that this Red Rock, there was used to hide submarines in World War II. Now, we didn't see any submarines, but swimming underneath these rocks and seeing these caves when you pop out on the other side, and one of them actually had a natural skylight that shone down into the blue water. And I'll tell you, when you're under that water, looking at that light shining through that blue water, it was something else to see. But that was definitely a highlight of the boat tour. The final island was called Kunopoa, and it was a very interesting island in which there was a beach. It looks like an H, where the middle part is the beach, and there's bays on both sides. And so it also has a electric generator bar on it, a restaurant that serves visitors that come on these boat tours.
Okay.
And again, I'm not talking about a very lively place. At most, there were 3 yachts in the bay and maybe just a handful of people on this beach. And there's even some hills that you can hike up to and take great view down at this H beach from above, which is, again, just spectacular to see. And again, this is a uninhabited, just island off of Astypalaia. So overall, this boat experience is definitely a recommend.
Okay.
So the third day we would recommend, since we've already been through the Hora and we've explored by boat, is we would say if you don't already have a rental car, to rent a car and explore the island and stop at a couple beaches along the way. One of the ones we would recommend would be Lavadia. It's probably the most popular beach on the island. It has some cute restaurants and cafes and bars, so it's very easy to access, especially if you have family with you. Another one that would be a little bit more wild and has an interesting drive down a dirt road. It almost looks like Mars with some beautiful views, would be Kamanakia, and that's on the southwest side of the island. So you're going to go over some bumpy roads. It's a little bit more off the beaten path. There is a restaurant on it, but you will probably have a little bit less people than Lavadia. Stanos is one of the other famous beaches on the island. This is going to be, if you think about it, the thin part of the butterfly, so not on the wings, but right in the middle. And that has supposed to have a great restaurant. We didn't get to spend much time there. But then if you want something quieter like us and you want it a little bit more off the beaten path, if you're okay to go with no amenities, there's 2 beaches that we would recommend. One would be Plotkeys and the other one would be Zanakia. Both are about a 10 to 15 minute hike down. It's a little bit steep, but nothing too challenging. Definitely doable. Just make sure you have good hiking shoes. So one of the great things about Zanakia is that when you sit on the beach, you can see a view of the Hora on the hill in the distance, and it's really beautiful. I will say that, just a warning, if you're going to, or maybe it's not a warning, but if you are going to the remote beaches, that most of the remote ones do become nude beaches, so make sure that either you're comfortable with that, you don't have to participate, but just make sure that you're comfortable with that.
Okay. Good to know.
As we mentioned before, if you're spending time in Astypalaia, we think 3 days is perfect. 3 nights. You can do it in 4 as well. Again, there's so many beaches around the island, so many just quaint restaurants that you could visit in 4 different villages. You can just take your time and go around the island and find these wonderful spots. But a couple of restaurant recommendations that we definitely would recommend was one just outside the Hora in Astypalaia called Akti. And this restaurant blew our minds because it was small little individual tables just perched on the side of a cliff. So you have your own private rock formation terrace. And you're looking into the bay at the Hora over the water. So it's wonderful. And again, so we went for sunset one night. Basically, nobody was there this time because, as I mentioned, the Greeks like to start their dinners around 9 o'clock. So again, I was just extremely surprised at how friendly the service was, and honestly, not that expensive for a place with such a wonderful atmosphere and decor that's stunning. We were lucky at this time of the year that the euro was closer to 1 to the US dollar. A dinner would cost maybe, for both of us with drinks, maybe 50 euros, and some places 30. It was quite shocking. And then another one, that Katina?
Yeah.
Yeah, Cucina, there is a small bit of an Italian presence on the island as well in terms of some of their architecture as well as food. And so this was actually a pizza spot, but not the traditional pizza spot. Again, cliffside with views just to die for and not crowded at all. Excellent drinks.
Beautifully decorated, like a boho minimalist, modern. We were just very surprised about the restaurants there. Given that it didn't feel like a touristy island, they just had really elegant restaurants.
Yeah.
And only 1,500 people. That doesn't seem like you'd be able to support that many different
Absolutely. And these are family-run businesses. So that's what was shocking about it, but honestly wonderful just to eat there and taste their food.
Yeah, we were curious and wondering if the tourist season really did pick up in August. I know for Europeans, everyone goes on holiday in August, so perhaps we were a little bit early in the tourist season, but we would always think that July and August were going to be the big ones.
Yeah, and temperatures for this time of the year are honestly like it's the summer, so you're talking May, June, July. It's the least amount of rain. We didn't encounter any rain while we were there, so it stayed pretty warm. But one of the things that we definitely have to mention about Astypalaia that's pretty unique is the high level of winds.
Okay.
It was something that someone told us about, but we didn't really believe it. We thought, oh, what are the chances? But no, the winds were high. We're talking up to 20-mile-an-hour winds and sustained.
Okay.
So it's pretty amusing because you have this wonderful hora and you have visitors that wear dresses or skirts or even like I was wearing a fedora, and everyone has to walk around and hold things down while they're walking, which is really funny to see because it's hills and the winds are just insane.
You get used to them, though, after a while, I will say. After the first day, it's a little shocking, and then after that, you're happy about the wind coming because if it's hot and the sun's blazing on you a bit.
That's what I thought of. I thought of being in the tropics with that lovely trade winds, and you learn to love it.
Yeah, for sure. It was cool and stuff because in some pockets where it wasn't, you do start to get pretty roasted.
And you learn to wear hats with straps.
Yes, so you're walking with your hand on your head the whole time.
Exactly.
Ah, bon chien. Bonjour, je suis Theo, a tour leader with Explore. And this is Punti. He's helping us find truffles under the trees next to this beautiful vineyard. Maybe for tomorrow's cooking class? We call it semi-heure. Parfait. Semi-o'clock. Not everyone gets to enjoy a Bordeaux sunset this way, but you will if you explore. No, Punti. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel. Explore.
Don't miss out on the last few weeks of football action with Prize Picks, the best place to win cash while watching the playoffs. The app is simple. Pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Download the Prize Picks Daily Fantasy Sports app today and use code FIELD and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code FIELD on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks. Run your game. Must be present in certain states. Visit prizepicks.com for restrictions and details.
So I think that pretty much wraps it up for Astypalaia. From there, we took a ferry from Astypalaia to Amorgos. And that was the wonderful thing about this itinerary for us was that Amorgos is our next stop, again, just to the west of Astypalaia, a little bit north, and about, what, a
2-hour
ferry ride? I will say for the ferry from Astypalaia to Amorgos, I was very impressed because it was the large ferry that is like a cruise liner. Full deck, outdoor space, multiple restaurants inside. Honestly, I was expecting...
Really?
Yeah, I was expecting a simple ferry. When I say restaurants, I don't mean like walk-in separate restaurants like a cruise ship, stations.
Yeah. Okay.
But the flooring was very nice. It was very comfortable, and it made for a good experience getting over to Amorgos, and an even better one when you arrived at Amorgos, because one of the things we immediately noticed were these soaring cliffs. Amorgos, we were wondering how different Amorgos would be from Astypalaia. And now Amorgos is larger. It's about 20 miles long, 50 square miles in total, versus about the 11 miles long in Astypalaia, but slightly larger, 2,000 residents. So again, we were looking to avoid the crowds. So
huge.
We're talking about,
it's huge.
Yeah, it's huge compared to Astypalaia, exactly. But the cliffs, they were soaring cliffs, and we were not expecting that. I think the highest cliff in Amorgos is about 821 meters, but there's many of them around that size. And of course, these are the uninhabited parts of the island. So as you pull up on the ferry, you're just seeing these waves crash against these massive cliffs, and they go on and on until you finally get to the port. And one thing to note on Amorgos is there are 2 ports. So Amorgos is not accessible by plane. And that's the other unique
Right,
thing
I
about
figured that.
Amorgos.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it also, again, keeps tourism slightly down, but you have to get there from the ferry system. So you've got two ferries. So when we arrived in one ferry port and then actually left on the other, but we can get to that later. But yeah, Amorgos just blew us away as we pulled into that port with a lot of the architecture just embedded into some of these mountains, which was really nice to see.
Which we'll talk about when we talk about some of the monasteries and the churches. So if I will say that if anyone's heard of either Astypalaia or Amorgos, it's probably more likely Amorgos. And Amorgos is actually famous for a movie called The Big Blue. So that's an 80s cult film. It's about some free divers. We actually haven't caught it yet, but we plan to watch it very soon.
It stars Jean Reno and Rosanna Arquette for any movie buffs out there.
You'll get a lot of French visiting the island. It features Aya Ana Beach and then the monastery that we're going to talk about. But as far as how long to stay in Amorgos, we did it in 4 days, but we would definitely recommend 5 to 6. I think there's a lot we left out just because we had to rush through it. So definitely recommend a longer stay as far as an itinerary. As far as where we stayed in pretty much the middle of the island between the two ports. And we were happy about that because we could explore both sides of the island, the north and the south. But we will say the one kind of inconvenience around that was that every time we wanted to go out to dinner, it was like 10 to 15 minute drive. So that was a little inconvenient. If we were to do it over or recommend a different place, we'd say maybe stay near the Hora of Amorgos or even stay in one of the little villages on the north side.
Yeah, it just makes it.
I'm actually surprised it was 10 to 15 minute drives. As I look at a map of it, it doesn't look like there's a single stretch of road that is straight.
It's hilly, but the
Right.
speed limits there and are fairly lax, as well as not much traffic at all.
That's not always a good thing, though.
We're not talking about Germany, the Autobahn. For an island, it was pretty safe. The one thing you'll have to watch out for on Amorgos for sure are the goats. There are plenty of wild goats causing traffic jams, but they are honestly a sight to see because these goats are right on the cliffside with the blue ocean in the side. And we stopped many times to just take a picture of these goats.
Got it.
But we do recommend renting a car. Now, Amorgos being larger, once you arrive in the port, the easy thing there is you can walk right to the rental car facility if you've set it up in advance and you have your car waiting. So that's, again, another nice convenience of a small island like that. But I think if we wanted to talk about our itinerary, on day one, we decided to check out this monastery that we had heard about that was supposed to be in a cliff. It's one of the main attractions on Amorgos, and it's called Pania Hozoviotisa. And typically we would be like, it's a site, maybe we'll check it out at our convenience, but we decided to just scope it out. And we drove, it was about a 15-minute drive from where we stayed. And unfortunately, you can't see it off the road. You park in an area that is a small car park, and you then have to walk up a series of stairs. And there are many stairs. It takes about maybe 20 to 30 minutes to get to the monastery. But these stairs aren't super steep. They're gradual incline, so it's very comfortable. But what we saw as we walked these stairs, it just blew our mind because slowly but surely you are walking cliffside quite high up with the deep blue sea beneath you. And all of a sudden, this white, just magnificent white building appears inside the cliff. And it is literally built into the mountain. And the interesting part about this monastery is that it is apparently known to be the second oldest monastery in all of Greece. Now, I tried to confirm that's true, and I think maybe a definition of monastery might differ from place to place, but it was built in 1017 or 1027, depending on what you're reading. And it sits cliffside 300 meters above the sea. It's about 8 stories high. And again, as you curl around this cliff, it's just more and more of this wonderful white embedded in the rock monastery starts to reveal itself to you. And we were honestly in awe. And we went around, I'd say, 12 o'clock noon. And one thing to note about the monastery is that they actually close between 1 o'clock and 5 o'clock. So we had not too much long time to get up there and actually go into the monastery. You have time to take pictures and such, but we were hustling to just make sure we got in before they closed. And they do have a dress code. So you have to wear long pants. I think females have to cover their shoulders.
Females have to cover their shoulders, and actually women are not allowed to wear pants. They have to wear a long skirt.
They have clothing that they'll give you if you want to go into the monastery. They look like very big farmer's pants, and since it gets pretty sweaty while you're going up there and hot, I would definitely recommend you can wear shorts while you're going up those stairs, but if you can pack something in a bag to throw over when you go in the monastery, that would be ideal. But only 4 or so monks operate the monastery. And when you get to the opening there, there's no photography allowed inside. And so there's about only 4 chambers or so that is actually accessible to the public. And you walk through a narrow set of stairs and you go into these rooms with artifacts. And one of the things that is of note of this monastery is that there is a historic icon that's within the monastery that the monks take out every Easter and show at all the villages. And there's some lore around it. I tried to look into it, and I guess the story goes is that it washed up ashore and some local villagers found it and decided to build the monastery there. But every day that they went back to continue building, the sea came up and washed away what they had done, which made them build it apparently higher and higher onto the rock, which is why it sits 300 meters high into this cliffside. Whether that's the true story or not, it was so wonderful to understand. The monastery is built after the Virgin Mary, which is the patron saint of Amorgos, and so that's its kind of history.
Got it.
Let me think of something.
I think that 1 out of every 3 photos I saw of Amorgos was this monastery.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was actually what inspired our entire trip. Sometimes when we do research, we see one thing that stands out, and then we build our itinerary around it. This was what really triggered our inspiration for the trip.
Yeah, and when you go into this monastery, there is a balcony level too where you can step outside. And again, the views from this monastery perched up into this rock, it's just phenomenal to see the sea and the stairs. A couple things I will note about when you do visit the monastery is that I would probably recommend going in the morning session because the sun is facing it at that point. If you go after they close for their break, they reopen from about 5 to 7, you're going to be in the shade at that point, so the monastery just won't stand out in its bright white as it does when the sun is facing on it. But that would be the only thing I would recommend in terms of timing to go.
We've also heard that sunrise there is gorgeous, but we never made it up that early.
Fair enough.
Blaming the jet lag on that.
Yeah. So continuing on from the monastery, it's a great opportunity to, again, check out some of the nearby beaches. There's a wonderful taverna called Mauro, which we ate at. And again, just wonderful to see these flowers decorated around the tavern, but it's not decorated, it's natural. That was the thing that was remarkable about these places, is that they weren't manicured and overly done. It was just natural the way the setting was. And so even the tavernas, which are usually just casual eateries, for lack of a better word, is they have great local fare. They serve traditional raki or siporo, which we definitely should talk about, and traditional
Which is good
meals.
if you have some paint on your wall that needs to come off.
We can talk about raki and siporo right now, because when I travel, I do like to understand the local spirits in that and understand, okay, where did this come from and how did this come to be? And in Astypalaia, siporo was prevalent.
Okay.
In Amorgos, it was raki. Now, raki and siporo are actually the same thing. They are made by the byproducts of the winemaking process. So anything edible, the leftovers go in and it gets left for 6 months to age and then distilled. And that's what produces raki and siporo. But siporo is distilled twice. So I tended to prefer the siporo only because it tasted a little smoother to my palate. But then there's raki mellow, which is when you add honey to raki and you sweeten it a little bit. It's really a drink that's used to break the ice, and it's very traditional in Greece. But in these islands and these tavernas, you will find that you won't find cocktails, but you'll find wine, beer,
And when you say break the ice, it's about 45% alcohol. So yes, it will definitely break the ice.
Yeah, it's 90 proof, 80 proof, depending on
yeah.
who. But it's basically Greek moonshine. So your comment about taking paint off the walls is accurate. I think when you're there, you definitely should try it. And when we were up in the monastery, the one highlight of that experience is the final chamber is you sit at a table and the monks serve you water, raki, and I forgot how to say this, but it's a Turkish delight. It's called lukmaki, I think, and it's a sweet. It's a dessert, and the way I could describe it is it tasted like a fruit-flavored marshmallow. And I guess it's pretty traditional Greek dessert, and it's called in Greek Turkish delight. But raki was served too. And so you can imagine in the middle of the day after the hot sun, you're taking a drink of raki from the monks. When in Rome, or actually in this case, when in Greece, why not? Back to walking through or just traveling through around after the monastery. Yeah, you just check out a bunch of beaches. There are so many around the island to see, and some, again, have facilities, but some are really just require a pretty strenuous hike, and those are the ones we enjoy quite a bit.
Should we go to the next day?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'd recommend spending 1 or 2 days near Astypalaia in the south, where the monastery is at, and exploring those beaches. And then we'd also recommend spending a day or two in the north near Ayali, which is the North Port. And there's 3 really beautiful villages there, the Loria, Langata, and Patmos. And there are these villages high up on the mountaintops. The Loria offered us a really kind of probably our favorite beach hike of the trip. You're going to start in the town of the Loria, and then you're going to hike through this gorge called Mikri Viklada. And it's this white, dusty, mountainous gorge that you wander through for about 30 minutes. It's a little bit downhill. And while you're wandering to this beach, you can see little glimpses. It's like this beautiful blue oasis in the distance, and you're getting closer and closer, and you're boulder hopping. And when you finally get to the beach, it's this piratey, the movie The Goonies type atmosphere. There was lots of flotsam and jetsam. There was an abandoned boat. There was a random basket that looked like someone had just weaved it. It was kind of eerie in a sense, but at the same time, very beautiful. And we happened to have the beach all to ourselves, so we spent a couple hours there just lounging in the ocean.
And it's not difficult to get to.
Yeah.
I think when people think a 30-minute hike, you might think it's strenuous, but right while we were leaving, a family with children came by. So it's a pretty easy path to follow, but it is just for the more adventurous who want to experience a beach like that.
Yeah, I will say that the hike back up was more strenuous because we were doing it around 1 o'clock and the sun was beating down. And I think after that, for the day, we felt like we were spent, even though we wanted to hike on to other beaches, and we did,
Yeah,
I will say.
So pick your battles wisely when it comes to your beach hikes.
Yes, exactly. Another town on the north side that is worth exploring is called Langata. And one of the landmarks of Langata is another chapel that's built in the side of the mountain. It's not as big as the monastery that we looked at, but it's called Astypalaia. And it's this narrow staircase that leads into this little chapel. It's about 5 minutes out of town, but you can just see it from the roadside. At night, if you drive by, it's all lit up. It's a big, massive rock with a lit up little staircase into a little church. So it's really a sight to see. If you do decide to climb the stairs and you're not too afraid of heights, it's a beautiful lookout over the bay, the Ali Bay. So definitely recommend you check that out. And it's also interesting as you navigate up through the island to the north. The vegetation changes a bit, so it's not as dry and rocky and arid. There's some tropical weaved through. Even wandering through Langata, you could see palm trees and more so tropical plants and vegetation. So that was really interesting. We wish we would have actually spent more time up in the north just exploring those little towns.
Yeah, and one of the things we learned while we were on Amorgos, which was really interesting, was as you're driving around, you see a lot of these little chapels built in random places. Most of the time they're built up on hills offering a really amazing view. And we learned that they weren't actually built to commemorate something negative or a death, for example. Because as you can, in the US, sometimes when you build memorials, they're to commemorate someone passing. In this case, we learned that they were built to actually celebrate someone surviving, perhaps a near-death experience, perhaps surviving a sickness or illness.
Like to commemorate a miracle at the end of the day.
Exactly.
Okay.
And there are many, and then there's some smaller mini icons, almost like, how could I describe it?
Like a roadside shrine?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. That's a good way to describe it. And there are many of these around the island, and people were taking pictures
Now,
of them.
are you talking about the little tiny ones 2 feet tall that
Yeah.
are quite often placed on the road where someone died?
There's some of that there too. Yes.
Okay.
We're talking about
Yes, I've seen those on Greek islands, which give you pause when you're driving.
Yeah, but that's not necessarily, again, it's not because someone passed, at least not on Amorgos. That's what someone told us. I'm not sure if, Chris, you want to verify that or not, but that's one of the things that we were told.
Interesting.
You've been to Greece before. You've come across those quite a bit all around Greece.
Yeah, we saw them a lot on driving the main highway in Crete. And the way that highway is driven, which is it's a 2-lane road driven as a 4-lane road, we maybe just assumed they were from where people had died, because that was what I was certainly thinking of as I was driving it. But it could have just been assumptions.
Yeah, we were told we ran into this Australian person of all people.
So what we did learn when we were there, which is interesting, and I'm not sure how many people are aware, or probably more than we are, but there's this large group of people that are Australian that have Greek heritage, because I think sometime between 1900 and even after World War II, there's a lot of people from Greece that migrated to Australia. So we met this family who's both the husband and wife had roots back in Greece, and they were coming back with their family. I think that they holiday there a lot. Just talking to them, they knew more of the locals and the local traditions, so we actually learned a lot from them. They gave us the tip to go to the village Lingata, and it was funny because they said, you have to go to this restaurant in Lingata, you should try it. We actually went on our last night there, and we ended up running into them in one of the alleyways of the streets, and then they told us about a live music place, and we followed the family up to the live music, and we got to see some traditional live music in the village as well. So just those fun stories about meeting people along the way of your travels and how bittersweetly you meet them again and get to spend some time with them. It was a really neat experience for us.
It's nice with these smaller islands because everyone's looking for the same thing. It's the less touristy experience, right? So when you see each other, you have that common bond automatically when you're traveling. But that was the one who told us about the roadside little shrines, I guess you could say, how they were celebrations. But even some of the smaller ones that were built up into the hills that are a little bit more mini kind of chapel.
When you can walk inside them, it's definitely a different thing.
Yeah. These are more, they're like monuments, let's just say, some bigger monuments where you can't walk inside. But those are sometimes perched up on a hill that you can walk up to, too. So it's quite interesting to see these sparkle in the distance on the hills. But yeah, Amorgos definitely had a much different topography than Astypalaia for us, and the experience there was very different from Astypalaia, even though they were both remote islands.
And I think of that versus the third island you went to, which is Santorini, which I honestly love. You're talking about a place that in the heat of the summer, there may be literally 7 cruise ships in the caldera of the place. So certain portions of it just get completely overrun with tourists.
Yeah,
because,
absolutely.
You're talking about 7 boats that have more people on it than either of these 2 islands. So.
You're absolutely right, Chris. And for us leaving Amorgos, again, for our itinerary, we were able to catch a ferry from Amorgos to Santorini to spend one night there before we caught a plane from Santorini back to Athens to get back stateside. So we had been to Santorini before. We've spent about 4 nights there in the past, about maybe 7 years ago. And for us, it's a little bit it's an interesting one, right? Because it's an iconic area in Greece. I've heard about Santorini. They've got the wonderful, beautiful whitewashed buildings on the cliffs, the beautiful sunsets. The downside, I guess, like you said, is the crowds. Oia, I think it's pronounced, is the popular side on the north side of Santorini where a lot of people congregate to watch sunsets and stay there. And the streets, when you walk to the main drag, it can be like walking through a subway with that many people in front of you and behind you as you're navigating to shops and so forth. And a lot of the shops are designer shops like Gucci and Prada and so forth. So you lose a little bit of that Greek authenticity because it's fairly commercialized. So because we wanted to avoid crowds on this trip, what we did was we stayed in Megalahori. So the 2 most popular areas on Santorini are Ia, if I'm pronouncing that right, and Amorgos. Now, we stayed at Amorgos 7 years ago.
I think I heard it pronounced I, and so now I'm trying to remember. It's been a long time since I've been there, so.
I think you're right, Chris. It's Aya. We'll get it. But that is the most popular part. And again, watching the sunsets from any part of Santorini is spectacular. It just happens that part of Santorini and Aya has those whitewashed buildings on top of each other, so it's fairly iconic in the blue domes that you see in many pictures. But then you also have hundreds of people out on their balconies with their cell phones out, like when you see no flash photography in certain theatrical things. It feels a little bit like that. So if you've never been to Santorini, I do recommend going to it because it is iconic. But if you're looking to avoid the crowds and you still want to go to Santorini, or you find you should, Megalahori or Amorgos, I would recommend to stay in. And you can even take a wonderful hike from Amorgos to Aya along the cliffside and just see the cliff sides and the villages from your hike. I think how long is that, about an hour? I can't
been so
remember.
long.
Yeah. But back to Megalahori. Megalahori is a little more quieter, and we stayed one night and we went down to the village. We ate at a wonderful restaurant called Rocky. Again, back to Rocky.
Okay.
But the interesting part about this village in Santorini is that it was fairly quiet. It was very relaxing. There was a tavern with live music there, which is common in these villages where they'll just have string player and a singer just belting out some local tunes. But one of the things we noted was there's a leather shop in Megalahori, which we highly recommend you go to. 7 years ago, we came across this leather shop, and it's still there standing today with the same owner. He does, slippers, sandals, cuffs, belts, everything handmade. And we were just so happy that he was still there because despite the pandemic, it's a mom and pop shop. So for him to have his shop survive all this time was remarkable. But definitely recommend this leather. You can't miss it if you're in Megalahori, but I definitely recommend strolling through that city. And
yeah. I will say, we saw beautiful sunsets in Astypalaia and Amorgos, but the sunsets in Santorini, there's just something about them, and they also last forever.
Oh, yeah.
After the sun goes down, the sky continues to change color for, it seemed like, an hour or two. So I will say that there's something about that to make sure that you get a place with the view of the sunset, and that's exactly what we did. We knew that we would just chill and watch the sunset that evening from a little mini infinity pool, and that was our little paradise for Santorini.
for one night.
I will just say that if you do go, I recommend off-peak. It's definitely some place that I think we stayed in Akrotiri, which is just a little way out of the main drag, and we stayed in Villa Mathios, and our host, Kostas Papalekas, I had to look it up, was just very wonderful host. But he said, I can sit here and talk to you on a night like this when there's one cruise ship in the harbor and it's late May or something like that. But he said a week or 2 weeks from now, I just would be too busy. And so it's just a very different place if you can go not in July or not in August, but early June, better even would be May. It's a beautiful island, and I highly recommend it. But yeah, I think there are strategies you should use to especially avoid when the cruise ships are there, because they take over large blocks of the place, especially the downtown in Thera, especially.
These are violent criminals, so they're not going to go down easy.
ABC Tuesdays.
Let's get this done.
The Rookie is back.
We have 2 new rookies starting today.
Howdy.
Being a cop is stressful 24/7. Every year on the job is different.
And Training Day
We have a serial killer at large.
never ends.
We need an ambulance!
The Rookie. All new Tuesdays on ABC and stream on Hulu.
Anything else we should say about these islands before we get to our wrap-up questions?
One of the things that guidebooks recommend on Astypalaia is what's known as an infant cemetery. We didn't want to go see this. It felt a little bit morbid to us. I guess in 1995, there was an excavation, and they found up to maybe 2,000 or more babies buried in urns, and some up to 2 years old, but mostly newborns. So there's a little bit of mystery shrouding this, and I guess Astypalaia is known to have some connection to the goddess of childbirth. And I believe that it's said that maybe women came there to give birth, and some of the babies may have passed early on. But the cemetery is boarded up. There's not much to see there at all, so we skipped it. Now, if you're into that, I think definitely it's an easy walk from the main Hora. But that's something that we just chose not to do. And in Amorgos, there's also a beach there that has a shipwreck. The shipwreck is a commercial ship that was named...
I saw that.
Yeah, it was named the Olympia. And I guess in 1980, they experienced some horrible weather, and it was basically pushed and slammed up against the shore and left there. It's a small beach. It's a little bit of a hike, not long, maybe 20 minutes to get down there. Not that big. And it's just, to me at least, a big rust bucket in a beautiful beach. So it feels like trash. But again, if you're into looking at shipwrecks, It's quite big.
And I
You
will
can't-
admit, I am into looking at shipwrecks, that I actually find it fascinating, but
There you go.
I also
So-
understand that it might look like trash to someone else.
So there you go. I think you can see it from the top and make a decision if you want to go down and see it. But it is a dive spot. People do dive there and swim and check it out.
I actually saw someone that did a YouTube that kayaked there, like kayaked around the ship.
Okay.
But yeah, I feel like this was a big back and forth between us. Should we go see the shipwreck? Should we not see the shipwreck? So
We had just done a beach hike for about 30 minutes and we were pretty exhausted. So to think to walk down another semi-hike to get to the shipwreck beach when we saw the ship from up above, we decided to pass and spend the time at the taverna.
And I am Switzerland here. I am not going to take sides between the two of you, whether this was the right or the wrong thing to do here.
Chris, you
we
wanna
do
pack
not
it
provide marital counseling as part of the service. So.
Yeah, we were trying to decide. You want to pack a lot in when you go to these islands. There's so much to see and so little time, honestly, and you got to plan out your itinerary just right. The other thing I'd like to mention about Astypalaia is their Smart and Sustainable Island program, because it's the first of its kind in Greece. And I guess it's a partnership between Volkswagen and the Greek government, in which Astypalaia is the first island that's planning to go completely sustainable and with electric vehicles. And from what I understand, Volkswagen has started to replace all of the government vehicles as well as commercial vehicles on the island with electric vehicles. They've even gone so far as to remove all of the junked old cars and motorcycles off the island. And again, in an island this small, to do charging is quite easy. You don't need much of a charge to get around.
Right.
So charging
range
stations
is not so much an issue.
Right. So charging stations have been set up around the island. And I found it remarkable because an island this small, remote areas of Greece to be that ahead. We were walking into the Hora and I saw a bicycle coming uphill quite easily. And I was startled because I was like, wow, that person's really strong coming uphill on the bike. And then I realized it's an electric bike. And then I was like even more startled because I was like, God, they have electric bikes here. It just seemed so future thinking compared to the type of island we were on. So I thought that was really interesting about Astypalaia.
Excellent. As we go to wrap this up, you know what is coming. You were standing in the prettiest spot let's narrow it down to Astypalaia and Amorgos. Where are you standing and what are you looking at? And is it the ship and are we going to start that fight again?
we can leave the ship out of this for now.
Okay, good.
Because I will never know.
It's definitely not the ship.
So if I'm standing in the most beautiful spot in Astypalaia, I'm on the road leading up to this old windmill called Palos Milos, and it's overlooking the Hora. So it's the most clear, kind of highest view of the Hora that you can possibly get. Just gorgeous standing up there and taking in the view.
And on Amorgos, sorry, Chris, were you going to say something?
It just reminded me, when I was seeing pictures of Amorgos, I saw the line of windmills at the top of the hill sort of thing. And again, I suspect a windy island from the fact that the windmills are so prevalent.
Yeah, actually, the 4 iconic windmills are right below the Hora as you're walking up, but there's this one lonely windmill that's on the top of a hill, and that's where the view is. So it's interesting that there's kind of clusters.
There were windmills on Amorgos too. I guess all of this area have some winds, but Astypalia's wind by far was more than Amorgos.
Okay. Michael, you had a different answer to that question.
On Amorgos, it's standing cliffside on the steps to the monastery with a view of the sea below you and the wonderful white monastery above you in the mountain.
Excellent. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in these remote Greek islands.
The wind.
Yeah, wind on Astypalaia for sure.
Excellent.
And if we're going to get to Amorgos, I will say the goat traffic.
Okay, got it. And if you had to summarize the two of them in 3 words, or 3 words each, just for marital harmony here, what 3 words are you going to use?
I think we can do it. I think we can compromise and just do it in 3 words. We don't need 6, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Dramatic, authentic, and tranquil.
You talked about this ahead of time, didn't you?
We knew you were going to ask, Chris.
I always love it when people who have heard the show before come on. Our guests again have been Michael and Cassandre from Journey of MC on Instagram. You can see some of their pictures of this trip or some of their other travels. Thank you so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for the Greek islands and specifically for Astypalaia and Amorgos.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
I want to put out a special thanks to patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler financially. If this is your first time listening to Amateur Traveler, this message is not for you. I don't want you to be sponsoring the show. You've just discovered it. I want you to go on a vacation. I want you to use Amateur Traveler to help you plan that trip. And then when you come back, if you had a great time, and if Amateur Traveler helped give you a better vacation, then maybe think about sponsoring the show. If you're interested in sponsoring the show, go to patreon.com/amateurtraveler. I got a great email recently from Joy who said, is there a way to get a printout of the podcast so I know how to spell all the areas your guest mentioned in the podcast? Great question. We answer it periodically in the show. I guess it's been too long since I've answered it. I do not do transcripts of the show. I used to when somebody else was paying for it, but it's just too much work. But what I do is I do show notes. And so when I talk about at the end of this that you can find the show notes on amateurtraveler.com, I've taken all the places we've talked about and I put in the name of the place and a link, quite often to the Wikipedia page, because that's often where I use pictures from for the enhanced version of the show. And that same information also shows up in the lyrics of the episode. So if you're in a podcast player, look for a lyrics button, and that same information in terms of all the different places can be found there. And that's particularly helpful in some of those places when we're talking about places that are a little hard to pronounce. Or, if the guest has a different accent than you have, then it might be hard to pick some of those things up. So we always have that in every episode. And then I heard from Simon who said, "Hi, Chris. I was very impressed with your recent guest speaking about London so eloquently and managing to pack so much into a small amount of time. Can I add a place right next to Borough Market, which is really worth a visit, especially for North Americans with an interest in history? Southwark Cathedral, unlike Westminster Abbey, regards itself as the people's cathedral, and you are as likely to find memorials to coal merchants, grocers, or hop factors as you are to celebrities. However, your listeners might be interested to hear that John Harvard, founder of your famous university, was baptized here in 1607. And my favorite memorial is the sculpted grave of a Mahomet chief, Bruce Two Dogs Bosom, who was buried here in 1735. He came over to petition the king for the return of the lands taken by settlers, but died of smallpox while in London. The law in those days declared that no foreigner could be buried within the official boundaries of London, so his body was carried over the river beyond those dragon figures which guard the old city walls to Southwark. So this cathedral and Borough Market next to it lies outside the old city of London. It's also free to enter, unlike Westminster Cathedral. Keep up the great work, and I'm especially looking forward to your report from your organized trip to Turkey, which must be happening soon. All the best, Simon." Yeah, I guess you missed that memo, which was we had to cancel that trip, unfortunately, because we had so many people who had something come up. And so we're looking for what we're going to do next, and I would suggest joining the newsletter. I'm planning on getting on a newsletter within the next week with a little more information about what's going on in my busy life this summer, and you can always go to the amateurtraveler.com and look for the newsletter link and sign up for that, and that's a good way to get other information about the show. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com, and thanks so much for listening.